You know, I couldn't get through and all that.
One more time.
Hi,
Irish.
I thought I was going to be the opening tradition.
Oh, good, Dion.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hi, Dion.
So Sarah's on her way. Apparently her previous call's running a little bit over, but Taylor reassures me that she'll be here.
Okay.
Hey, Dion.
So we are streaming live on Facebook as well. At least I think we are. It could be happening. So as everybody kind of streams in, I will jump right into the housekeeping. You're on mute, Leslie.
I'll start share screen then. Sorry, I was singing earlier.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't forewarn you guys. All right.
So I'm going to spotlight your video, Dion.
Oh, all right.
Hey, Dion, did you get that stuff I sent to you on that Illinois piece of legislation?
I
Interesting
did.
reading, huh?
I haven't gotten to go through it yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was out on the road the whole day with the after food distribution and everything, but I will.
Yeah, take a look at it. I'm going to send it to the coalition as well, since we're talking about those type of safety measures that should carry some penalties to people who get stupid.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so just want to welcome everybody on, and for Labor Day 2020 or 2020, if I could speak English. All right, so the goal of this program today is 60 minutes. Thank you for joining us. And for our attendees, you're automatically, no sound for you, no video for you. However, we will have question and answers at the end. So please feel free to submit your questions. And in a moment here, I will also open up the chat so that you can share with us, what Labor Day means to you, but that's when we ask for it. So I want to actually go ahead and turn this over.
Uh-oh.
Just gonna welcome.
Something happened on her end.
Yeah, there was a bit of a lag, Dion. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to.
We have Lisa Marie.
Yeah, Lisa Marie.
Hi. Hi, I'm Lisa Maria Cow. I'm a former transportation security officer here in Honolulu, and now a national organizer with the American Federation of Government Employees Union. And we welcome you. And the purpose of today's event is to bring an awareness and respect for workers' rights and responsibilities, and to communicate clearly that the health of the community is directly connected to the well-being of our workers. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors and organizers of today's event, the University of Hawaii West Oahu Center for Labor, Education and Research, the CLEAR team, the 9th Annual Labor Fest Hawaii, the Hawaii State Fed AFL-CIO, the Hawaii Airport Coalition, and our guest speaker, Sara Nelson, President AFA CWA. At this moment, we'd like to ask you all, what does Labor Day mean to you? If you can put that into the chat, I think that's what Dion's opening up.
So I will open that up, but I actually wanted to ask Irish Barber to share with us what Labor Day means to her.
Thanks, everybody. Irish Barber with the IATSC. I'm the business representative. My dad was an iron worker, so I grew up in a union household. However, as a kid, Labor Day just meant hot dogs and fun with the family. As I've gotten closer to my union and all of you, the affiliates, it means so much more. Labor Day is a chance for us to reflect on our accomplishments and join together to see how we can collaborate and move forward together, where we've missed some things and where we can improve, and also to bring in the folks who are not in unions as well as our younger union members. It means a great deal that we pause and reflect on what we've done together and how we can move forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Irish. And remember, you guys can actually throw that in the chat too. Thank you, Arlene.
Okay, are we going to wait a few moments so that we can call on?
Go ahead and go on. Yeah.
All right, thank you. 1 second. So before we begin, we'd like to hold a moment of silence for our air transportation workers and their families who have either become ill during this pandemic or have passed away due to COVID. So a moment of silence, please. Thank you. We begin our program with Dr. William Puette, the Director of the Center for Labor Education and Research, who will give us an overview of Labor Day in Hawaii. Dr. Puette?
Oh, thank you. So you have to stop sharing that presentation for me to share my slides. So can you take that one down, and thank you. Okay, so I'm delighted to be here, and CLEAR, our Center for Labor Education and Research, is overjoyed to be able to co-sponsor this event with the AFL-CIO. I'm going to show you some slides. I'm going to try to keep my presentation short because if anybody who knows me knows that that is not my nature. So I will understand if at the appropriate time I get somebody interrupting and saying, "Okay, that's it. Thank you very much." But these are some slides from a program that is part of a course I teach on Hawaii labor history, and I pulled slides that have to do with the history of Labor Day, I suppose, to begin with. But as a matter of context, I can do this. I thought it's important. It was mentioned in previous sessions that we had earlier on the indigenous race and diversity program that Hawaii has the highest union density currently, and has for many years, the last couple of decades, at the very least, been either in the top three. All right, this year we are indeed at 25.5%. We lead the nation, and so too bad New York. So of course that's a percentage, it's not raw numbers, but this has been the case for a long time. Hawaii has a strong labor movement compared to the rest of the country, although compared to global unionization, as I often make out, it's not exactly such a huge percentage. But that being said, how do we do that? I really think that we account for that because of the history. And I've often said that the more oppressive employers that you have, you end up, when you finally are able to organize, the stronger the union that you will end up creating. And I think that's the case in Hawaii, where because of the awful oppression that was suffered by the early, particularly sugar workers. And so I like to sort of go back to this first important strike, which happened in 1841, and it was all Hawaiian sugar workers. This is before any other groups were brought into Hawaii. And the plantation opened up on Kauai in 1835, and the first strike was in 1841. And it wasn't like a union-led strike. It was sugar workers Hawaiian sugar workers were not real pleased with being paid in pasteboard scrip at 12.5 cents equivalent a day. And so those are actual reproductions or scans of the scrip that people got, 12.5 cents. And so, it was more like a wildcat situation because it was not organized or led by a group per se, but they had to deal with it. So, okay. And by the way, that strike didn't really end with a whole lot, except that it turned out the Hawaiians were capable of duplicating or making their own versions of those scripts. So, so they were able to sort of do it with classic Union Sabo cat finesse. So, but what happened shortly thereafter, and this is, this time period marks the time period when the people who were like the children of missionaries ended up taking over the economy and the legislature. So their organization, the Royal Hawaiian Agricultural Society, was founded in 1850. Shortly thereafter, as you can see, they were able to pass this Masters and Servants Act, which is really an awful law establishing a system of contract labor. And so one of the reasons it's worth talking about is Masters and Servants law. This was these are the law, and Hawaiian on one side and English on the other. Identified and used the term for servant in Masters and Servant. Today we talk about employer-employee, but in the early days of the labor movement in a lot of places, not just in Hawaii, they were governed by this Masters and Servants law. And the term that they used for servants or workers was actually this awful word. So kauwa, and it's in the dictionary, it's an outcast, pariah, slave, untouchable, menial, a caste which lived apart and was drawn on for human sacrifices. And that's the word that they used to translate servant as an employee in the Masters and Servants law, and by which they brought in a huge number of people from all over the place. And so because the Hawaiians were struck by a number of different plagues, and sounds similar to today, they were interested in supplementing the workforce in order to get these other groups to come in order to be able to grow the industry, particularly the sugar industry. So first Chinese, you can see, then Portuguese, and then huge numbers of Japanese, and later on Filipinos. And a lot of this had to do with that there would be, if you just had like the Chinese primarily, there would be what were not called strikes in those days, but riots on the plantations. So then they would try to bring in another group. And the Japanese were brought in such huge numbers that they tended to actually organize and strike. And so shortly after the 1906 strike of Japanese workers, they started bringing Filipinos in, as you can see, in 1907. And those became the two dominant groups on the plantation over the years. And you can see just from the numbers, okay? So the other thing that probably people know in Hawaii, but there was an overthrow of the government, okay, which took place in 1893, and then later on we were annexed in 1898. Okay, the powers at that time period decided to have recognize big time with the parade, the first U.S. holiday, on the calendar, which happened, extraordinarily to be Labor Day. Labor Day was recognized as a U.S. holiday in 1894 for the first time. So, they looked at this and said, oh, and this was not organized by labor. This was organized by the employers and the industries, and particularly the sugar factor companies. And it really did become the very first largest parade of its that had ever been in Hawaii. That was on, I think, the little slide they used about my presentation. And this is from the newspaper, the time period. Okay, the parade was the best ever seen. It was supposedly the biggest ever seen. Okay, but it should be noted, okay, they didn't have weren't able to bring photographs into the pictures in those days, so they had artists, right? So sadly, the huge, mostly Asian labor force on the plantations was not recognized or invited to join the parade. Instead, there were horse races at Kapiolani Park, the Grand Ball and the drill shed next to Iolani Palace. All those events were really almost fashion events for the ruling elite in Hawaii at that time period. So that's our first Labor Day. It's not exactly the best of all examples, but it took a while for other things to develop. By this time, we started to see the fact that there were different ethnic groups. And one of the problems that happened was that the employers, and of course not prohibited by any law to the contrary, paid people according to their race and ethnicity. So this is a quick look at how, although Hawaiians ended up, because there weren't that many in the plantations who wanted to sign up as a kaula, but Portuguese, Japanese, and Chinese were there, and they were ranked pretty much by this. And you can see that Portuguese were considered more worthy, and then Chinese after that, and then Japanese, down to South Sea Islander. Filipinos didn't come in until 1907, so this chart doesn't reflect it, but they would be paid even less as you go along. So, and they were segregated in the camps for each of the different sugar plantations. There'd be a group that were Japanese and a group that were Filipinos. So some of this, it may be argued is, well, that's where they like to live, but actually it really helped separate them, because there was conscious effort to pit one group against the other. And then also to protect the plantation in case the Japanese went on strike, because there were a whole series going back to 1900 of strikes that took place, some just on one island, some in one plantation, but they would tend to be just by one racial or ethnic group. So early on, Japanese, then Filipinos, after they came in, started to organize. There was an attempt at having a joint strike in 1920, and there were some Filipino strikes thereafter. This is obviously a tactic that had been used to try to divide and conquer. It's a standard tactic to pit one race against another. And the other interesting thing about Labor Day is that from the very beginning, even before there was official recognition of any Labor Day besides what the Big Five was doing, there would be attempts to not just have picketing when there was a strike, but to have parades. So this is a 1920 strike parade of women who were in Waipahu, and they were going to catch the train and go into Honolulu to be able to demonstrate, because there were laws that were passed at that time period that prevented picketing. And so instead of picketing, there was parading. And that became a mark of Hawaii's labor history, particularly from the early time. The last of the ethnic strikes was on Maui in 1937, led by Filipino Antonio Fael, the Vibora Luvaminda strike. And that, interestingly enough, had CIO organizers, so that wasn't a September Labor Day, it was the May 1st Labor Day parade at Pu'unene. And that was the last ethnic strike on Maui, and it was on Maui, so there you go. Okay, prior to 1935, and of course I picked that because that's the National Labor Relations Act, it was very, very hard to organize in Hawaii. Any workingman who tries to organize and bargain collectively to better the conditions of himself, wife, children is looked upon as a communist, a radical, a socialist, a red. Sounds familiar. Things in a lot of history of the US, and it's certainly the case in Hawaii. So there you go. But after the passage of the National Labor Relations Act, there was a huge organizing that took place, led particularly by the ILWU on the various sugar plantations. And you can see this big jump in union membership. Okay, and so the major landmark organizing strike for Hawaii's labor history, sometimes called the Great 1946 Sugar Strike, started on Labor Day in 1946 and involved over 21,000 sugar workers. And it shut down 33 of the 34 sugar plantations that were in Hawaii throughout the islands, not just on Oahu. Okay, the 46 sugar strike brought an end to paternalistic labor relations. It was such an important event, and it really is responsible for the organizing that ended up becoming the Democratic Party later on. Okay, but it was the first territory-wide strike and the first industry-wide shutdown in Hawaii's history. The sugar industry obtained injunctions against mass picketing. So again, the striking sugar workers held parades instead to demonstrate their strength and solidarity. In fact, I tend to tell people the history of Hawaii's early strikes is a history of parades, and particularly Labor Day parades. It was a natural event, and it was very difficult to stop that for constitutional purposes. Okay. So Labor Day, and what I've got now, and I'm trying to keep this real short for you, is some interesting pictures. So here, and you can track it out. This is the next year, 1947. Hawaii longshoremen demonstrate for parity with wages, and this is a strike, or a parade, if you will, that ended up in culminating in the 1949 dock workers strike, another major organizing event in Hawaii's labor history. Okay. 1948, okay, just to show you this is not just sugar workers, this is iron workers, all right, in part of a Labor Day parade in 1948. 1949, the Bartenders Union. All right, and these, I picked these out just to show that there was active action that was taking place for Labor Day. It wasn't a time of rest for most people or most workers. The unions were involved intensely in organizing, and Labor Day became a part of that organizing. And 1967, all right, I can't do every year, it'd be a little bit too much for you, but I thought some of these representative pictures would give you an idea. Labor Day 1971, when we first have really the Hawaii State AFL-CIO, and there's their banner as part of their parade. And so something unfortunately happened after the 70s, and that's where I think it's, the point I'd like to sort of conclude with primarily, is that the 80s and 90s saw sort of like the end of the Labor Day parades and the period of Labor Day picnics. Okay? And so, and really, it sort of took over. They were often trying to combine the picnics with some sort of political action, and by bringing politicians in to speak to the group. But it was not a parade. And the picnics tended to get soft, in my opinion. These are cartoons. It would be just as critical as you can possibly be, but you got to ask yourself, how far off the point are they? And then in 2000, 2001 through 2003, there was an attempt to resuscitate the Labor Day parade on Oahu. And so that I thought was fairly successful. Not as much as maybe we'd like. It's thinner groups. They weren't all packed together. And it wasn't because there's social distancing. It was trying to get enough people. But these would go through Waikiki and really shut down traffic. So there it is. This is, again, I will say that even recently, as 2018, we have Labor Day parade, but this time, it's focused on a particular union dispute. And you can see this is the Local 5 and the hotel workers who on Labor Day 2018 were essentially, is that a strike? Is that a picket? Or is that a parade? And probably the answer is all of the above. But it's an opportunity for an action, and an action is involving and organizing the workers. So I'd like to finish my presentation at this point by wishing you all a happy Labor Day. That's actually the Hawaiian for Labor Day, La Nui o na Limahana. And thank you for your patience. Aloha mai kako.
Thank you, Dr. Puette.
Thank you.
Now I have to stop sharing.
Thanks again, Dr. Puette. My name's Leslie. I'm with the Center for Labor Education and Research. And with that, I'd like to introduce Morrison Luca. He's going to be talking about the Hawaii Airport Labor Coalition, who they are and what we stand for. Morris?
Hi, aloha, everybody. Hope everyone is well. As you can see on the screen, these are the unions that form what we have now settled on, the Hawaii Airport Labor Coalition. And there's one thing, or a couple of things that we have in common, and that is that we all come from the same industry, the air transport industry, either flying aircraft or serving sedan. But I want to continue on a little bit on what Dr. Puette has just shown us. In the last couple of years or so, this group of unions have participated in a series of demonstrations at the airport. And starting with the strike, hotel strike in 2008, October 2008, and a few months later, Kevin Beatty and his group, the AFA Council 14, did a demonstration that had roughly about 3 unions that participated. And their biggest concern at that time was air safety, safety in the cabin. And the United at that time was trying to cut staff. And so a bunch of us showed up, supported him, and he had supported us during our strike at with Marriott and Killia as well. He was there, I think, more often than some of the strikers sometimes. And so shortly after that, during the government shutdown, Lisa Maria Kao and her group had to go to work but not get paid. So we had a walkthrough of some demonstrating to the public that people are reverting back to having to come to work and not get paid. And shortly after that, there was an informational picket between the AFA and Hawaiian Airlines. And that went on for a series of months. And that was I think it was in June of 2019. And then December of that same year, Local 5 went on strike with the host workers. And then a few months later in February, the AFA at Hawaiian Airlines did their last picket before the pandemic. And I wanted to mention that because I wanted people to realize is that when Kevin had his first rally about air safety, there was 3 unions that came, the bricklayers, the AFL-CIO, and Local 5. When the February 2020 came along, there were 15 unions that showed up at that 1 hour rally, 1 hour rally. The reason why I'm saying this is because this particular group really had shown what solidarity is all about. Now, I've been around for a while, and a lot of you on this call have been around for a while. And we hear that word, solidarity. And solidarity shouldn't be a punchline. It shouldn't be a passive way of saying that we're sticking together. But this particular group demonstrated in a much larger fashion what solidarity looks like. Solidarity looked like Kevin needs help, we're gonna help him. Lisa Marie needs help, we're gonna help her. Anybody who needed help within our area of air transportation, we're gonna be there. We're gonna be there because it affects everyone, all working classes. And I think it's about time that we try to insert ourselves into public policy to ensure that we have a place and we can provide for our families and our community as well. And so I just wanted to emphasize that sometimes we don't know what solidarity looks like until we're standing in front of it. And that's, I think that's the end of my presentation. Now, I want to also ask you to invite Kevin Beatty, who is the president of the AFA United Airlines Flight Attendants Council 14, and he's my friend, Kevin Beatty.
Mahalo, Morris, brother. Appreciate it. And yeah, thank you very much for helping to organize our Hawaii Airport Labor Coalition. I think you've explained about how the power of us working together can achieve so much more. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Sara Nelson. Sara is the international president for my union, the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA. She served as the international president for our union since 2014 and is currently serving her second 4-year term. She first became a union member in 1996 when she was hired as a United flight attendant, and today she represents 50,000 of aviation's first responders at 20 airlines. The New York Times called her America's most powerful flight attendant for her role in shaping and helping to end the 35-day government shutdown, and she's widely recognized as one of the most powerful voices in today's labor movement. Sara led AFA's efforts to achieve 18 legislative victories in the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018, including achieving a 2-hour increase in minimum legal rest for flight attendants and other efforts to combat fatigue on the job. Before that, she led the 90-day campaign to keep knives and other weapons off planes. She also crafted the campaign for 100,000 Eyes in the Skies, which successfully resulted in mandatory training for flight attendants to recognize and report human trafficking. She's a leading voice on issues facing women in the workplace and across the country, encouraging women everywhere to join unions, run unions. You may have seen her on MSNBC, CBS Sunday Morning, PBS NewsHour, as well as in articles in the New York Times, The Nation, The New Republic, and Forbes magazine. Sara is passionate about AFA's continued mission to achieve fair compensation, job security, and improved quality of life for aviation's first responders, as well as a safe, healthy, and secure aircraft cabin for passengers and crew alike. Sara, e como mai, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And I'm very proud to have you introduce me because, of course, you've been such a wonderful leader right there in Honolulu, doing exactly what Morrison was just talking about, building that solidarity around all of us at the airport, but also all of us just as workers coming out for each other. So thank you so much. If you would join me, Kevin, and all of you, in just a brief moment of silence. I think that we need to start recognizing the workers who have lost their lives during the course of this pandemic. And I would like to especially recognize our Hawaiian Airlines AFA brother, Jeff Kurtzman, who recently lost his life due to COVID that he contracted in the course of doing his duties as a flight attendant. So if we could just take a moment of silence, keep all of them in our thoughts. Sit with me now. Thank you so much. As the great labor organizer, Mother Jones said, mourn the dead and fight like hell for the living. And we are doing that right now. We're doing that by coming together today, honoring the people who have come before us, honoring the people who gave up their lives to give us the rights that we have. Our rights that we have as labor do not exist because they were just bestowed upon us by benevolent overlords or employers. They were won because people thought it was important enough to stand up for each other and to fight against all odds for a better day for ourselves and for our families and for our fellow coworkers. And this airport union coalition that you are building is extremely important. We are seeing the fruits of it all over the country where workers have come together. I think about the times that flight attendants and Unite Here catering workers have come together to share their stories. And the truth is that we have so much that's in common. We have so much that's in common, even just within our workspace. Those same carts that are cleaned and loaded in the kitchen, sometimes with freezing cold water in the morning because the catering companies are so cheap, trying to get those contracts with the outsourced work that the airlines had outsourced, and now have companies bid against each other for the lowest cost so they don't turn on the boilers until the morning and that water doesn't get hot to clean out the carts until later in the day. to the fact that they are pushed so hard to move those carts through the kitchens quickly, so that even the ones that are tagged by the flight attendants on the planes that are not working, they don't have time to go get the replacement. And we learn these things by talking with each other. Our workplaces are connected. Our work is directly connected. But the other thing that happens when we come together is that we understand that we're real people with a lot of the same issues in our workspace, but mostly in our home space, in the way that we want to take care of ourselves and our families, in the way that we recognize so clearly the Unite Here member who said one job should be enough, and we could all immediately relate to that slogan. So when we come together, and we come together to fight for one another, and we come together on the picket line, we tell each other our stories, and we learn that we're not that different. And we learn that we have way more in common than anything that could ever divide us. And once we come out for each other, it's more likely that we're going to come out for each other again. I have the US mail is not for sale right behind me. And flight attendants have been working with our sisters and brothers, the letter carriers and the postal workers, to stop the privatization of our post office. And of course, all of these issues have become so acute during COVID. But we started to learn that the mail is not just the mail. It doesn't just exist on its own. In fact, actually, the mail flies on our planes, and our airlines get revenue from that. And now, today, when the airlines have cut back service because of COVID, the mail has had to find other places to go, and that has cost more, and that has put the post office more in jeopardy, and that has put communities more in jeopardy because people can't get the medicines that they need for the equal postage payment that they can pay through this service that we all count on. We have so much that is in common, and when we come together and we tell our stories, that is where our power truly expands. Some people think that power is a limited resource, but using power builds power. And once we get a taste of our power, we won't settle for a bad deal, and we won't stand by while someone else gets screwed either. And that's what you're building with the Airport Labor Coalition. It is going to grow in power, and more management from any company, or even in the White House, are going to have to understand and make a risk assessment up front that when they take on one of us, they're taking on all of us. And the likelihood is that they will settle rather than take on the risk of allowing workers to taste our power. The government shutdown was referenced several times already. And there were lots of rallies. There were lots of efforts to get the attention of the fact that 2 million people were out of work without a paycheck, and others were forced to come to work without pay for nearly 2 months. And it wasn't until we started to talk about what Mother Jones talks about that we create all the value in this world as workers. We build the great palaces, but we neither dwell in the palaces nor use the value that we create. The capitalists are always organizing, and we knew this. We know that in prior crises, there has been an effort to extract more from labor. People see this as an opportunity to take from us, even in the worst crises. As we were mourning our friends that we lost on September 11th, there were bankruptcy attorneys who were licking their chops and waiting to get the spoils of what this would create. And there were others in management who understood and are on camera. We have them in a PBS documentary, Can I Afford to Retire?, saying we just had to wait it out. We just had to wait until the workers got so beaten down and so used to accepting something that they would have never accepted before. So if we're telling each other these stories, I think about that. I think about those moments after 9/11 when we were in all those airline bankruptcies and there was an effort to take all of our pension plans. And it was only after the White House failed at privatizing Social Security that it turned to trying to privatize the United States Postal Service by adding a retiree healthcare pre-funding mandate of paying 75 years in advance for those medical benefits for people who are not even born yet, not even working at the United States Postal Service, to try to bankrupt the United States Postal Service and take it private so that more can go to Wall Street. It was only after the White House failed at privatizing Social Security that there was a return to privatizing defined benefit pension plans and turning more and more to defined contribution plans. Imagine if we knew going into these crises what they're going to do. Imagine if we knew each other's stories. Imagine what it was like when I stood on the GM picket line last year and I heard the same stories about scheduling and two-tiered employment and pitting workers against each other that I could hear in any flight attendant local right now. We have so much in common, and when we come together and tell our stories and understand that we have common demands, we build power around those demands that we have together, and we have each other's backs. And understanding that someone has your back is more powerful than any corporation has power that they would like us to believe. So Labor Day is a good day to celebrate this power that we have together and to talk about how we're going to come together and build that power even more and take what we are due. And in this time in coronavirus, it is exposing all of the problems of the labor movement being whittled down, of working people's power being diminished and stripped away, and the attack for over 50 years to try to destroy unions and try to have people believe that there's nothing that we can do, that we have to accept something less. And so here we are, understanding that what we started to do in a labor movement to try to build to healthcare for all, but starting in our contracts, just like in AFA, when we started on our contracts and demanding that LGBTQ workers should have the same rights as anyone else. They should have the same benefits, and domestic partner benefits should be a part of our contract. That led to us testifying in San Francisco city hearings, where the first ordinance was put into place long before Massachusetts made marriage legal. And finally, our entire country gave that right. And all of that was building to a place where we can all have the same rights, because until all of us are free, until all of us share equal rights, all of us are in jeopardy of losing those rights. So we can see now during coronavirus, we have more to do as a labor movement to make sure that everyone has healthcare, because management should not be able to use healthcare, a basic right to live free of pain, to be able to give your loved ones that care. That's a basic human right. You should not be able to threaten that against someone, just like they did in the GM strike when they took away the strikers' healthcare and tried to make them have to come back to work and not stand up for a fair deal. We shouldn't give employers that kind of power, and we shouldn't say that healthcare is something that should be tied to a job when we don't guarantee a job either. So we have an opportunity during this time to stand together and make sure that they're not taking anything more from us. You know how quickly they were to give us the term essential worker, and yet we're still waiting on that essential pay. Even right now, as we wait on this coronavirus relief bill that should have been passed in May, and the people who have been sent to the unemployment lines are losing that additional $600 that made it actually possible for people to live. When one of the chief economists from the Obama White House is out today on Twitter saying that, oh, we don't really have to give people $600 because unemployment is down to just 8% now. So we don't really have to give people any more money, even though it showed that actually for the first time people were able to live and pay their bills, and actually spent that money back into our economy, which helps support 5 million more jobs. We're still waiting on being recognized fully as essential workers. And if we wait for the politicians to do it for us, if we wait for the employer we think is going to wake up some night and say, how can I live with myself that I've been treating the workers this way? Then we're going to be waiting for a very long time and we're not going to get it. And so because we're so organized in the airline industry and because we have seen crisis before, when coronavirus hit and when we were not being given proper information from our government, so we didn't have a good plan for combating it, but our airlines went from United Airlines announcing that they were opening a training academy because the entire industry was planning to hire over 100,000 workers this year. And American Airlines announced the airlines would never lose money again. And Delta Airlines was handing out big profit sharing checks, once again celebrating more profits than they've ever made. And 30 days later, the airlines were on the verge of collapse and going with their hat in their hand to the government and asking for money to be bailed out. And we told them, you've screwed everyone so bad, people hate you, you're never going to get the money, but if you work with us and we get the money for the workers, we can get it done. And we forced management to agree to these things, that the relief package for airlines would only be for keeping workers in their jobs, paying our paychecks and other benefits, and that there would be no decrease to the hourly rate, and that there would be no stock buybacks or dividends and a cap on executive compensation. And where the White House tried to fight against this, by the way, Secretary Mnuchin tried to fight against this, and actually we had within the package, the same thing applied not only at the airlines, but for all the contract workers as well. And I want to just recognize for a moment that there was an effort to take away the funding for the catering workers at the airport during this process, because the airlines said, well, but if we give it to them, then they're going to expect more on the other side of this pandemic. And that is why they fought against making sure that the money was in there to have catering workers have health insurance. And then the White House waited to get the funds out the door so long that catering companies let go of their employees. So this was not perfect, but what we did was, instead of going to government and saying, here's a list of labor demands, here's a list of labor priorities, we hope you can set it into a labor section of this bill. We said instead, this is only going to happen if it is built for the workers first. That's the only way it's going to happen. And that's what we got. And yes, there were these warts because we have an imperfect government right now, and we have more work to do. But what we did was we built a package that was the first ever workers first package, and it did secure jobs where we followed through and demanded that it would, where we held them accountable. And it kept people in their jobs, and it has actually changed the behavior of Wall Street. So in the process of recognizing that we needed to fight for an extension, this ends on October 1st, you may be very well aware, and tens of thousands of our family members are set to lose our jobs on October 1st unless we get this extension. We've done such a good job of showing that this is the most cost-effective jobs program in all of coronavirus relief that even the people that were against us before are not fighting us now. But we can't get it passed because there's no legislative vehicle. There's a complete disagreement on coronavirus relief. And it's only now that the Republicans are facing the election that they're willing to even talk about it. I want us to remember that the House passed an act back in May 15th, over 100 days ago. And so much has changed that the package that needs to be passed now doesn't even look like that anymore. It also now has to include this extension of the aviation workers' jobs and those job requirements. So we're working to get that done. And 2 weeks ago, when we got 16 Republican senators in 24 hours to sign a letter to say that they supported an extension of our payroll support program, let's be clear, because the election's coming, until March 31st of 2021, so a 6-month extension. When we did that, the next day, the airline stocks went up by 10%. And I was on CNBC Squawk Box the next morning. And these guys, these talking heads who live in the world of hedge fund managers, were complaining about the fact that it's not fair that the airline stocks would go up. Well, they were arguing about the fact that because 16 Republican senators signaled that we may get this extension and there may be funding that goes to the airlines, that funding is to keep people in their jobs. That is the first time in history that I remember that Wall Street stocks went up based on betting on workers keeping their jobs. It's usually the other way around. So I say all of this certainly to let you know about the fight that we're in right now, but also to let you know that when we demand that the way that our government and our companies approach anything is workers first, we win. We change the whole ballgame. We change the way that the entire country operates, and we change the experience of workers. And workers start to demand more. It's sort of ironic now. We have workers that we saved. We know that we saved them getting paychecks these past 6 months. And they are furious that the union has not been able to get the extension in place yet, and they might lose their job. I love that they're engaging with us because it's an opportunity to have a conversation and get them engaged in the fight. But think about that. They're demanding more because they've experienced more. We have to help people understand that we can demand more, and we can demand more together when we go back to that idea of talking with each other about what our demands are, because they're basic demands. A job, healthcare, safety on the job, and respect for the work that we do, dignity in the work that we do. So I want to let you know that we need a coronavirus relief bill. We have done so much work that President Trump can't stop talking about airlines, talks about airlines every chance he gets, and has even talked about doing executive orders to extend this to help the airlines. Well, what's wrong with that phrase right there? It's not about the airlines, it's about the people. It's about all of us. And we're going to demand that Congress acts, because Congress is the only avenue to lock in those job requirements that I talked about. I want to thank all of you so much, because there was also a reference to the picketing for Hawaiian Airlines. And you should just know that because of your efforts, we didn't talk about this really publicly because everyone was talking about everything that was at risk. But because we pushed the company so far on that, they needed some good press, and they needed some good morale going into this crisis. And because you pushed them so much, you helped us push them and generate power there. We were actually able to achieve a tentative agreement in March, and the Hawaiian Airlines flight attendants locked in a raise at the beginning of this crisis. And their paychecks reflect that right now because of all of you. And then what we did as a union was we got together and said, you know, we have taken those cuts before. This moment is not, the problem is not labor costs. And we started out the process of talking about essential workers, and we should honor them with hazard pay. We should probably just pay workers that amount of money all the time for the work that we do. because the coronavirus has shown that, yes, a grocery clerk in the store is very important work to all of us, not just during a pandemic, but all the time. So we were able to lock this in, and then we got together as the union, as a union with other flight attendants, and said we need to be very clear up front that we are not going to allow management to pit us against each other during this time, because they will use the fact that furloughs could be coming, job losses could be coming, or just the very threat of the crisis itself to ratchet down labor costs. And if we agree to that, we could not, in fact, as flight attendants, even if we gave up our entire salary, it would not fix the crisis that we're in. We need to stand together and demand of our companies that they demand of our government that we have a plan in place to attack the virus, keep everyone safe in our communities and in our work, and keep our economy intact so that we can lift again on the other side of this. None of that has happened, and it's not going to be put on our backs. We say all the time, if you have a bad business plan, why are you making us pay for it? Not this time. So we put out a letter, all the unions representing flight attendants, saying there will be no concessions. And I have to tell you, I cannot tell you already the number of times that leaders have been able to point to that. And that management has come to me and said, okay, we know, we heard you, no concessions. And then let's talk about another solution. So when we do this, when we have clear demands, when we're clear with each other what we can count on and how we have to stand up for each other, it's not always easy. But by coming together like you are today and planning for the future and planning these events together in the future, you are going to build power every single day that you do that. And Hawaii is best fixed to be able to build that power going forward. So I'm excited to talk with you about this a little bit, and thank you so much for having me here with my Hawaiian ohana.
Thank
Mahalo.
you so much. Thank you, Sarah. So we did have 3 hands up. We have a few questions in the Q&A, but with the time that we have, Cynthia here has actually been waiting for a little bit, so I'm just gonna go ahead and allow her to talk. So Cynthia, if you go ahead and unmute yourself, you can ask your question. Okay, so maybe Cynthia is not available right now. So let us move on to Raymond.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, hi Raymond.
Hi. Oh, beautiful, beautiful talk. The best I've heard. Now, when is labor going to come, organized labor going to come to its senses that Medicare for all should not be tied to a job, okay? And that we need Medicare for all, for everyone, and that Joe Biden and the leadership of the Democratic Party, even though I'm supporting him, is dead wrong. Medical care is a human right and not a privilege, and I'm glad you brought that up. So when is organized labor going to do this?
Well, that is a good question. I think actually that the workers on the front lines actually believe that this is true. And we have combated this all over the place. I took on every single candidate during the primary, actually, this false idea that labor is against Medicare for all, that labor would be so concerned that we would lose what we have, so that we have to not have everyone have healthcare because it might mean that we lose our employer-sponsored healthcare. Here's the truth. Every single time we go to the table, we have to fight like hell to hang on to the healthcare that we had before, that we negotiated before. And we have to keep spreading the word about that. We have to keep spreading the word about the reality of our healthcare plans. More and more people who go uninsured, and the more unchecked the for-profit healthcare industry is, the more that our companies are not going to be able to even provide the healthcare that we have negotiated. And we're seeing that already every single time at the table. It was a big issue in the Hawaiian Airlines negotiations, hanging on to the healthcare that they had. It was a huge issue. It takes up time at the table, and it takes up our negotiating dollars where we're paying for something that we negotiated before over and over again. And oftentimes it's a win if we go out just taking on a bigger portion of the premiums, but capped. We have to come together and have an honest discussion about this. And if we can't do that during this pandemic, when people can't get proper health care, I don't know when we can. So I will just tell you, Raymond, that I am on this 100%. And if we stick our head in the sand and think that we're going to be able to hang on to what we have, history shows otherwise. Because when our pensions were terminated, guess what happened to the next person's? I know very well there was a domino effect. And so if we don't start advocating for healthcare for all and turn that negotiating power into the dollars that we could have in our pockets, you know, I was talking with the painters and they negotiated an agreement for a new group that they had organized in Texas. And in Texas, nobody gets health insurance for doing the work. And so they negotiated an option for the workers to either take the health insurance or to take the increased pay that they would get, which is an additional $10 an hour compared with the non-union workers, just so that they could encourage workers to want to be a part of the union. And do you know that almost 100% of those workers opt out of the health insurance so they can get the extra dollars? If we had Medicare for all, those dollars would go in our pocket and we would have health care. So I'm with you. We have to have an honest discussion about this. I'm not so much worried about Joe Biden. We have to get Joe Biden elected, obviously, because we need a democracy in order to continue to fight. And I know that being on the Biden-Sanders task force that was created, the first in history that a winning primary candidate actually worked with the losing primary candidate to put together a task force to talk about policy. That's never happened before. And that happened for one reason, because workers organized and built power in the Sanders campaign. And there was enough power there to force those discussions. So this doesn't stop with an election. We have the power as workers to change our conditions every single day. We've shown that. Why is there so much interest in joining a union? Why is there so much favorability for unions? Because while everything else is at a stop and nothing is getting done, unions are getting results. When the West Virginia teachers went out on strike, they not only got a result for themselves, they got it for every public worker in the state. And when they were thinking about whether or not to go out on strike, whether or not they could do it, the bus drivers said to them, "You won't have to make the decision because we will make sure the buses do not go." So we are getting results that we are building over time. We know that. We know that as union organizers. We know that as union leaders, that this stuff is hard work. Building this solidarity, building these relationships, doing this member education and consideration, having these discussions. But when the results come fast. Because when the power of solidarity goes into effect, there is nothing that can stop it. I often say solidarity is a force stronger than gravity. It lifts us up. And every time we experience it, we experience results. So I am confident that we're going to continue this discussion and that we will get a President Biden to sign into law Medicare for all.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so with that, we are going to go ahead and close out. Atsumi, I'm sorry that we can't get your question, but we're so privileged to have you and just want to encourage everybody that this will be available. So this has been broadcast on Facebook Live. And if you go and follow, you'll be able to see at HiCope AFL-CIO. But just thank you to the Hawaii Airport Labor Coalition and our panelists and Clear and everybody. Thank you, Irish, for sharing and everybody for joining us with that. Did
Labor
y'all-
Fest. Thank you, Dr. Lopez. Aloha.
Yes.
Happy Labor Day.
Happy Labor Day, everybody. Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you, Sarah. Happy Labor Day.
Happy Labor Day.
Okay.